what is mindset or inner game? Well, let me tell you about inner game first. The first time I heard of that term, inner game, was in a book by Tim Gallwey from 1974. I became aware of the book in the early 80s when I was in high school. I read the book and I became fascinated by the idea because it made so much sense to me. Tim is, in the book he talks about being a tennis coach, and he used to teach people how to play tennis. And in a nutshell, the game of tennis is about, hitting the ball and putting the ball in a place where your opponent cannot reach it. And that's how you score the point. And he used to teach people how to do that, how to hold the racket, how to move your arm in order to get the ball to land where you want it to land. So what he taught was essentially what came to be known as the outer game of tennis, the technique, the movements, how to hold, how to do this, how to move that. But he noticed that as he was teaching people, people were talking to themselves. For instance, if the student hit a ball really well, he would say, "Good job." But if he missed a ball, he would say, "Oh man, that was terrible." And the point of that is, it's a very innocent thing, but if you pay attention there is a dialogue between two entities. If I say, "Good job," there's somebody saying "good job," and there's somebody who's receiving the praise, right? Hey, good job. So we think of us as talking to ourselves, but if you really break that down, you realize there are two entities there. Well, Tim Gallwey called them self one and self two. And his idea in the book is that the dialogue between self one and self two is going to determine the outcomes in our lives. In this case, the game of tennis, but in our lives at large. That dialogue is also called inner dialogue. So a small portion of the dialogue is conscience. If I say to myself, "You're great, you can do this," it's conscience. But most of it is actually unconscious. We're talking to ourselves all the time, and we just don't realize it. So changing that inner game means changing that inner dialogue in a conscious, intentional way, and it will change your life completely. That's what hypnotherapy is all about. The idea of mindset, it's the same thing as inner game, right? So inner game is mindset. And the best illustration I have for mindset, again, the same thing as inner game, that inner dialogue, the way of looking at life that is mostly unconscious. The best story, I believe, I heard this from Bob Harris, a coach back in the 80s I used to follow way back when. I don't know if he's still around. Bob Harris talks about a story that I have heard over the years from several sources, but I heard it originally from him. He says that there's, it's one of those stories that from today's perspective seems a little bit strange, but in the story, the owner of a shoe factory looks at a map of the world and decides to send some salespeople down to Africa to sell shoes. So he sends the salespeople down to start making contacts and so forth, and then he ships 2 containers, one to each salesperson that goes into a different part of Africa, 1 container filled with shoes going to each destination. So the first salesperson gets there, and according to the story, calls back the boss at the factory, presumably New York, right? So it's whatever, all of those icons and all of those. So he calls back the boss and says, "Listen, nobody wears shoes here, so cancel the shipment. I'm coming home. Nobody wears shoes. We're done. Cancel the shipment. I'm taking the next ship home, and I'm going home. This is not a good place to be because nobody wears shoes here." The second salesperson, who goes into a different part of the continent, calls back the factory and says, "Listen, you must double the shipment. I need 2 containers because nobody here wears shoes. I'm going to have a field day here. I'm going to sell a ton of shoes here. So double the shipment." So the point of that story is that the events are the same for both salespeople. They both land into a brand new market in which apparently Nobody has been consuming the product that they're selling. But because of their mindsets, because of the difference in their mindsets, one thinks that the fact that nobody has been wearing shoes here means that nobody will ever buy shoes. The other guy says, yeah, nobody here has been wearing shoes because I haven't sold it to them yet. But once I start, everybody's going to want shoes because nobody has them. And as a result, I'm going to sell way more than anticipated. You see, they're both trained salespeople in this story. They both sell shoes, the same shoes from the same factory. And they both land in a place where people are now wearing shoes, according to this story. Please don't push this too far, because obviously I know people have shoes in Africa, whatever, but you know. So the point is that there's something about us, that inner belief that comes out in the least expected of ways in our reactions to unexpected events and so forth. That's the mindset. When a person is overweight, for instance, you will notice that you watch them at a reception, at a cocktail, at a restaurant, they have a hard time saying no to food. You know, and there's no judgment there. I'm simply explaining it. It's very difficult. Somebody comes and offers them food, they'll typically eat it, and that's part of the reason why they're overweight. And there's a mindset there. It's unconscious. It's ingrained into them in childhood. I have heard, and I was trained that way. Don't throw food away. You must eat all of your food, because do you know how many people go hungry? As though if I eat more than I can, somehow that eliminates the other guy's hunger. You know, oh, you cannot throw food away. Food is sacred. This was a big one that I used to hear as a kid. Food is sacred. You cannot throw it away. So if we have some left over, somebody has to eat it, because we're not going to throw this away. Well, we're not going to throw this food away. Nobody's hungry right now. So either I put it in my belly or I put it in the trash can, which makes my belly kind of feel like a trash can in a sense. No wonder people become obese, you see. So these are, it might be different for you or somebody that you know, but the point I'm saying is that that inner programming that tells you don't throw food away, so even if you're not hungry, eat it, that kind of thing is the mindset. And unless the mindset changes, the person will continue being overweight. Now you say to me, well, what if I just tell John not to eat if he's not hungry? Well, John already knows that. But when the time comes that he's not thinking about it, he'll still eat it, not being hungry. Because it is driven by the unconscious programming. So John might be distracted talking to a buddy of his. I'll give you an example. I was talking to a professor once at school, at the university. And we were discussing something that was uncomfortable to him. I asked him for a favor. He didn't want to do it. And he was uncomfortable because he didn't want to say no to me, because we kind of owe each other favors, whatever, but he didn't want to do it. So we're having this conversation, and he's explaining to me why he's uncomfortable with the idea. No big deal. We thought, this kind of conversations happen all the time at work, right? So somebody walks in with a bowl of candy, exactly as we were talking. We were talking by the door of his lab, and somebody walks in with a bowl of candy. Without missing a beat and without moving his eyes away from my eyes, he reached out, grabbed a couple pieces of candy, unwrapped it, put one in his mouth, inhaled that thing. I didn't even see him chewing or anything. The thing was gone within a fraction of a second. And he never skipped a beat. He continued talking to me. And I'm looking at that and I'm going, this was years ago, right? But I'm looking at that thinking, wow, it is amazing. And there's no judgment there. I'm simply explaining. This is an example of how the unconscious resorts to certain behaviors given certain inputs or certain stimuli. For instance, if I feel uncomfortable, I resort to this. Maybe a candy bar will soothe me. That kind of thing. So it isn't a matter of telling people, oh, you shouldn't eat a candy bar just because you feel uncomfortable. We know that. We know that intellectually. It's like one part of the mind knows that, but it is the other part of the mind driving that behavior. So it's important to understand this mindset and inner game refer to these unconscious or subconscious processes. And it is the changing those unconscious processes that create a change in our lives. Because otherwise, if I told you, for instance, look, as an example, right? If you want to be successful, you have to be organized. So the first thing you have to do is clean your desk. Giving an example. You say, oh, if you believe me, right? If you agree with me, you say, okay, I understand you. So I want to be successful. You're telling me I must clean my desk. The first day you clean your desk. But if in your subconscious mind, the images that are stored, perhaps because when you grew up in your house was disorganized. Again, these are examples, but follow along. If those are the images that you have stored inside of you, there are only two choices here. Only one of two outcomes are going to happen. Either you're going to default back to a messy desk, because that's what is stored inside of you, or you're going to have to use a huge amount of willpower, perseverance, day after day, reminding yourself, putting alarms, shocking yourself, pinching yourself, reminding yourself, having an assistant remind you of this every day, and eventually becomes the new normal. And of course, it is possible to change by sheer willpower alone. It is possible. But the same thing happened in the long run. In other words, you changed your mindset. You changed your inner game. So a lot of people say, well, it takes 28 days to create a habit. Well, most people cannot keep up a new behavior for 20 days, 28 days, or whatever the number is. I recently heard new research saying that no, it takes 100 days to build a new habit. Well, again, if you can do something completely different for 100 days, of course you're changing your inner game and your mindset. But it is difficult for a person, let's say, who eats a candy bar every day for breakfast, as an example, to suddenly not eat the candy bar, let's say, for 100 days, to have the stamina, the perseverance. But if they can do that, of course, they're changing their inner game and their mindset. Now, let's say that a person is obese because they eat 10 candy bars a day every single day. And then you say, well, I don't need a hypnotherapist to help me change my inner game, because all I have to do is not eat 10 candy bars a day. That is, of course, true. But for most people who are obese in this example, they cannot stop eating the candy bar. So that's the thing. And if they can, of course, they'll be okay. They'll lose the weight. They'll be fine. But they're not eating the candy bar because they didn't know that they shouldn't. It isn't an intellectual issue like, oh, I didn't know that eating 10 candy bars a day would have something to do with my obesity. It isn't that. Not in today's world. Maybe in 1287, the year 1287, maybe we didn't know that, but maybe we didn't have candy bars back then either. I don't know. But nowadays, with Google and everything, how can a person honestly tell you, oh, I didn't know that eating 14,000 calories in candy would have something to do with my obesity? Nobody would say that. So it isn't a matter of being informed and knowing what I should or shouldn't do. It's a matter of implementing it. And that implementation, long term, is what mindset and inner game is all about. Okay, so I just wanted to illustrate that to you, hopefully answering the question. What we do, I don't work on the outer game. I don't tell people what to eat. For instance, when I work with a weight loss, with a person who wants to lose weight, I don't tell them what to eat. I'm not a dietitian, I'm not a nutritionist, and I don't have to. Do you know why? And I figured this out many, many years ago. Tell you a quick story. I went to do a lecture about 30 years ago on weight loss, and I walk into this room. I was a few minutes late. By the way, that is one of my persistent patterns, showing up late. So, it's not about you telling me, oh, be here at 2. I know, but unconsciously, I'm still working on that. I have to change that, right? But anyway, so I enter this lecture hall, and there were about 100 people there that day. And I stand up on stage and I look around. Every single person in the lecture hall was quite obese. That's why they were there. And I had prepared the whole lecture, about calories and protein and fat and how to eat this and how to eat that, because at that time I was really young. I was very academically minded, and I thought that was what they were missing. And as I look around, I realize all of these people, before I even start speaking, I realized all of them have struggled with this issue most likely for most of their lives. I didn't know these people, right? Most likely they've been struggling with this problem most of their lives. Most likely they're much more educated on nutrition than I am. They've struggled with this. They talk to their doctors, their neighbor, their grandmother. Most likely they got more information on that than I do. So I put my notes down and I started having a talk about inner game and mindset. I didn't use those words back then, but that talk was remarkably powerful. A lot of lives were changed that day. We did exercises, we did hypnosis right there. A lot of emotions came out, a lot of healing came out. It was not what I had planned, but that's what we did. And it was beautiful. And once again, what I'm attempting to illustrate to you is that we do what we do not because we don't know better. We do what we do because we have been programmed to act a certain way. We've been hypnotized to do it a certain way. And that hypnosis of life is what we mean by mindset or inner game. There's only one way to change your lives, and that is to change that inner game. And then it will be reflected onto the screen of the physical world, just like a movie theater, a movie projector. It will reflect, will be projected as a new lifestyle. But it starts with that inner game. All right, we'll continue talking about this. Blessings.